Hello, my name is Corey Loxon. I'm going to be talking today about the Synoptic Gospels, which was the focus of our class, which they consider similar stories is what it means, or seen together. So those three books would be Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So they believe that Mark was actually the first book written out of those and actually was the shortest, ironically. Luke was the longest. John, over 90% of the book of John actually was unique material, meaning that it was different than the other three of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So unique, obviously, meaning it wasn't found in the other ones, as I mentioned. So the gospel means good news. So like a story about Jesus' death, burial, resurrection is what that refers to. One of the stories that I found most unique was about the 70 AD, abomination, desolation, where the Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans, who took down the walls to try to find the melted gold. It's not talked about in the Gospels or in the book of Acts, so they believe that because of that, it was written before 70 AD, the Gospels were. So the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible written by Moses, who's one of my favorite characters. Moses being the baby that was floated down the river. So he became an orphan, basically was adopted by the king's, or the Pharaoh's daughter, I should say. She basically raised him up in royalty. One day he saw a manager, per se, that was being rough or aggressive or abrasive with one of the employees, and he slew that manager. And then, of course, he was scared because people started talking about it, so he ran to the other side into the desert, and that's where God used him, when God basically spoke to him in the burning bush and asked Moses to approach him, told him to take off his sandals. Moses says, "Who's speaking to me?" He says, "I am, is speaking to you," and basically called him to be a minister at that point. And of course, Moses was insecure about his speech, so he wanted to rely on Aaron to speak for him. So God said that was acceptable, and the two of them ministered for many years together. Moses was the leader of the children of Israel for 40 years in the desert, basically. Basically through the hard times when the Pharaoh wouldn't let them go. Of course, Moses was the one that sent the plagues over Israel, and God was able to part the Red Sea once they got out into the desert, and take them into dry ground. So, of course, the children of Israel were murmuring and complaining and not trusting in the Lord. So Moses basically went up on top of the mountain, and God had said that nobody could see his face and basically live. So God covered him in the cleft of the rock, passed by, and Moses was able to see his backside and was able to see the presence, glory, or Shekinah glory of God. And then he basically came down off of the mountain. His face was shining. The people were worshiping idols, acting all foolish and crazy. So Moses got angry, threw the tablets down, and broke them. Basically, they had to be rewritten later. So that kind of was a theme for Moses with anger, which shows me that I need to be careful as a leader with my anger, to manage that effectively and let God eradicate that in my own life so I can be more effective in leadership for him. Moses got angry again later, where he needed water for the people, so he struck the rock and the water came out. So they were thankful, but God told him, because of his anger and him lashing out and being a poor leader in that moment again, that he wasn't able to go across into the promised land. So between the Old and the New Testament, there was actually 400 years of silence, which they also call the intertestamental period, which they said God was quiet during that time period. One of the other people that I like most was Ezra. So he basically came to Jerusalem and taught the Israelites. He had a heart for God. That was at the end of Judah's exile. So learned about Ezra. Let's see, the Apocrypha was something that was interesting to me, which is basically outside of canon or scripture is what Apocrypha is considered. The text portion. Canonical gospel is not the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but it's the other books of the Bible, like James, for instance. The New Testament was written over 100 years, and interestingly enough, the Mediterranean folks that had seen all the miracles of Jesus and witnessed his ministry didn't leave any records behind, so that was kind of weird. There was the word ethnocentrism that popped up, which is basically perceived attitudes of one group, basically that are different, but also trying to be equal. So like readers today impose their values and their normatives versus Christ. Mark, they think, was the first book because Matthew and Luke actually clarified that book many times and shared some of the same stories, and they didn't deviate from that. So it was a primary source for their writings, it's believed. So the distance between us and Jesus and the Gospels, the main thing was time, culture, politics, social differences, and religion. And the Hebrew scriptures were shared worldwide, or the worldview, I should say, of Jesus Christ and the Gospels, which is why it's important to study New Testament authors and their scriptures. So I learned a lot in this class, really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and as well, and John, and the Synoptic Gospels, again, being Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with John being the one-off. So, anyways, hopefully that wasn't too boring. But yeah, I shared a lot about Moses because his life was the one that really stuck out to me the most. And it was a blessing to take this